This is the sunstone or the Aztec calendar stone, which is probably the most famous of all of the creations that the Aztecs have left us. It is in O'Reilly 841. And I first need to say that we aren't sure we are interpreting it correctly. It is a very complex piece of sculpture. We do think that it sums up the views on cosmology in the Aztec world, in particular referencing the stories of creation, and I'm going to argue the need for sacrifice in order to sustain the universe as it is. Okay, first of all, it does depict, it's round. It does depict the sun, the shape of the sun. It has also rays that are extending outward. And if you go all the way around the edge of this, you're going to see sharp points. Some of these sharp points are more defined than others. They're larger, they're more prominent, and we do think they would have been indicated more specifically with more vivid colors. They do, here's one, here's one, here's one, and here's one down here. They do reference the four directions and the four divisions, essentially, of the universe, of the world, that the Aztecs also carried out in city planning at Tenochtitlan. In the very center of this, there is a face. That face has been generally interpreted as the sun. So let's go over to the face located right here. It is referencing also the Aztec elite because it has ear spools on, one here and one over, one over here. It also has a tongue right here that is triangular, that is actually in the shape of a sacrificial knife blade. The two claw-like hands of our sun, one here and one over here, are holding what we think represents human hearts. This represents the fifth sun, the world as it exists now, but it is surrounded by memories of past creations, and the Aztecs believed that there had been four past creations, and that we were currently in the fifth one. The earlier creations ended essentially in failures, and these failures are associated with different forms of destruction. The destruction came in the form of, and let me take us to the rectangular picture glyphs that indicate these. So going right up here, this is, I believe this is the first one, when the world was destroyed by jaguars, and that's easy to work out because that's a jaguar. Then the world is going to be destroyed by water, and I'm going to say floods. And then over here we have another one of these images, and this is destruction of the world by fire. Up here we have destruction of the world by wind. Okay, that leaves us essentially with the fifth sun and the destruction that is anticipated to come through earthquake. Mexico City, in fact, is, I believe, on a fault line, but it's in a very earthquake-prone region, so this would be a reasonable assumption for a form of destruction for essentially the fifth sun. This is another look at our sun disk or our calendar stone. The work that's on the left is from the Getty. I've shamelessly stolen their slide. It is colorized, and the reason I'm showing you this, I can't guarantee the colors are right, but this would originally have been painted, and consequently it would have been a lot easier to make out the individual parts. You can see the four directions, for example, the way they are accented through the use of color. This is also an opportunity to suggest that this creation would not be standing upright as it does today in the National Museum in Mexico, or as it did for many years in a Catholic church in Mexico City. Rather, it would have been placed on the ground or on the floor, and it probably would have been intended as a location for sacrifice. In other words, we could expect liquid blood, perhaps of animals, perhaps self-sacrifice, or, of course, human sacrifice, the blood that is produced when a sacrificial victim symbolism is taken. I'd also like to point out to you that there is a web address down there for the Khan Academy, and I would recommend that you go there because they have technology that far surpasses my own. And what they can do is take you through this in a 6-minute presentation. That's all it is. They take you through this and they highlight the individual parts of this piece in a much more effective way than I can do with the technology that I have. So I'm going to send you to the Khan Academy. This is a closer view of our face. Blow up, maybe it makes it a little bit easier to see the claw-like hands and the knife blade tongue of the sun. Basically a sun that is demanding sacrifice in order to sustain it. Okay. This is an object that is highly debated in terms of the interpretation. I do want you to know that. And since we are self-distancing at home, for those of you who are interested, this is a much more detailed interpretation of the stone calendar created by the Aztecs, and you may want to blow it up and take a look at some of the individually identified portions of our creation. Okay, let me end with this for our sun calendar or our sunstone. The point that I think is being made here is that we need to provide sacrifice in order to ensure the continuation, at least as long as possible. Remember, there's a fatalism in the Aztec world, but at least as long as possible, we need to keep the sun going by providing it with the sacrifices that it needs. This is dictated by the creation story. The creation story, like all creation stories, explain why things are the way they are and more or less define what it is we need to do in our lives to survive. As a part of this, also around the edges, and again, this would have been clearly colored, but if you go all the way around the outer ring, and in this region right here, you're actually going to see, excuse me, the faces of two fire serpents. According to Aztec mythology, in the fifth creation, in the fifth sun's creation, a god gives himself as sacrifice to be the sun, but lacks the energy, the power to move on his own. Two other gods will jump into the fire, sacrificing themselves in order to provide the power to move the sun across the sky. Those are going to be the fire serpents we've already talked about, and that's exactly what is depicted here. They move the sun, they literally make time, and they reference the passage of time. They also suggest the need for sacrifice in order to protect and promote the sun and to maintain life here in our world. Okay, this is a very large carving, and I think it qualifies as a relief carving. Upper right, that's me the last time I was at the National Museum in Mexico, just as a scale shot to give you a sense, again, of the power that is typically present in Aztec works of creation. I want to just quickly show you another piece that was recently discovered in 2010. Near the Temple Mayor in the Sacred Precinct. It is huge. It's referred to as a monolith. In fact, it's coming in around 13 feet, over 13 feet by around 12 feet. The work is important for a couple of reasons. One, it lets you know that there will be continuing discoveries. When Cortez had the city destroyed, most of it was buried. It was either reused or covered over. And as work continues to be done in Mexico City for purposes of doing actual work on the city itself, or perhaps also in terms of archaeological excavation, we're going to find more and more and more, and it's going to add to our understanding of the Aztecs. This is the only surviving piece that has its original pigments, which adds already to our appreciation and understanding of what the Aztecs have left behind. This is one of the earth goddesses. We've already looked at the the Aztec Great Mother, who was one of the other earth goddesses. This one in particular is a kind of monstrous figure who simply refused to give life, to produce fruit, to bring life back to the planet unless she was fed with sacrificial offerings, which often implies human blood. So again, this piece tends to reflect the need of sacrifices and the constant offerings, particularly along calendar dates, to the gods and to the goddesses. This figure also is kind of interesting because she squats in a birthing position. So we actually get a vivid depiction of the way in which women, it's believed in the Aztec world, gave gave birth to new life. Before I forget, also, if we take a look coming out of her mouth in a zigzag pattern, there is a strip that is red on the piece that has been carved, and we do understand that to mean the sacrifice of blood that she willingly consumes so that she will in fact be able to produce new life. Okay, more images just to give you a sense of scale. This is big. The work of art, then again, does follow the mantra that I'm using: out of death comes new life, and promises to bring renewal, rebirth, and fertility to us and to our world. Okay, this is a diagram. If it is at all useful, please feel free to take a look at it. Just a reminder, we are looking at the birthing pose, which I'd like you to see also in this particular piece, which is located at Dumbarton Oaks in Washington, D.C. A reminder that this is a fabulous museum. Next time you are in Washington, please check this out. It's a little bit out of the way, so you might have to do a little walking, in fact, to get to it, but it is definitely worth the visit. We have for a long time been teaching this piece in art history classes as a classic example of Aztec art. And for many years, I taught it as an example of the hard-hitting realities that we find in Aztec culture and art. Due to the culture of the Aztecs, military aristocracy, basically forcing people to accept the realities of life and therefore being able to show those realities in their works of art. This is, for example, the actual birth process, which is not routinely depicted as a subject in artwork. It includes the violence and the pain of birth. We do remember, in fact, that women who die in childbirth have a special reward in the afterlife. So it was a highly respected activity to be able to produce new life. The violence, the pain here of birth is conveyed through the collarbone of the woman, which is projecting as she's pushing on her backside with incredible effort in order to get that kid to come out and end the process and end the pain and suffering that she's going through. Her teeth are barred in pain as she's doing this. And if you look in my slide right here, you might also be able to see that the stress of this is causing her ribs to become visible through her body. The figure who is emerging is not a kid, though. It is an adult male figure. And the explanation for this usually has been that the Aztecs placed such a high premium on soldiers. It was, as I've said, a conquest state, a military aristocracy. So what we're getting here is a fully formed adult who might be able to join that community. The piece also follows many of the rules of Aztec art. It tends to be symmetrical, somewhat severe, somewhat formal. It has an austere quality, not a lot of surface decoration, and a geometric regularity. And above all, probably I could say it's stark and it's very powerful. It is an expressive piece, and it has this quality of something on the inside of the stone attempting to get out. There is only one problem with all of that, and it is we think that this is a fake. We no longer believe that this is actually an authentic Aztec work of art. The popularity of non-Western art and of Aztec art in particular has led to very high prices on the art market, to looting at sites where you can get away with it, and to a number of forgeries. The question is, when we identify a forgery, or a potential forgery, because we aren't so sure about this particular piece, How do we handle it? And the best way that museums have found for handling these pieces, would be through labeling. So let me just take us to the label that I photographed the last time I visited this museum. The difficulty with determining authenticity in a stone piece is that we all know stone is old. What we can't determine scientifically is the date that the stone was carved. What we can do is look at technology and see if it was carved using traditional tools. We can also see if it follows traditional iconography. That means, is there anything strange about the way the subject matter is depicted? And in this particular image, excuse me, there is. So if we go over to the label portion on the right, birth figures common in colonial Mexican manuscripts are very rare in Aztec three-dimensional art. This is just not a subject that the Aztecs depicted. These works currently under study may prove to be 19th century conceptions, creations based upon ideas of what Aztec artists would have done, probably created with the intention of selling these for a profit and probably to rip off the person who is going to purchase the object. The data is not all concluded yet, and the decision is not in, but the scholarly community, the museum world is leaning in the direction of believing that this piece is a forgery. Nevertheless, it is not without influence in the world of art, and I would like to just have you look at this for a moment. One of the artists who certainly would have known it through reproductions if she never saw it in person herself is Frida Kahlo. And in Frida's lifetime, this would not have been understood as a possible forgery, but would have been appreciated for the power, the directness, and the honesty of Aztec depictions. What we're looking at on the left is a piece by Frida that depicts her own birth. And we do think that, in fact, it was influenced by the piece now at Dunbarton Oaks. So even as a forgery, continuing to have some authority on the works of other artists.